G'day, dear viewers. Ross and Jono with you once again, and we are continuing our investigation of the Shapira Saga, namely this book, the Moses Scroll, our textbook, of course, and we are up to chapter 7. The reason why we're doing this once again, going through the book, is because over the last couple of years, after Ross published this book, he has come into an enormous amount of information, and we want to weave that into the story for you. Where we left off last week was when Shapira arrived in London unannounced, having just been in Berlin, in Leipzig, showing those in Germany the scroll. And now he is in London, and he has arrived unannounced at the Palestine Exploration Fund. Sir Walter Besant, we were talking about this last week, names such as Captain Claude Condor and of course Christian David Ginsburg, who now is in possession of the scroll. And this chapter, I think, Ross, would it be fair to say that this is the height of the scroll's fame? Would that be fair? Is this chapter the height of the scroll's fame?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Up until now, let me ask you this before we continue. Even more so than when your book and Idan's book came out. I mean, I understand that when Idan's book and your book came out, it was once again catapulted into the front pages of newspapers around the world. But did it quite reach the fame yet as it did back in the day?
You know, that is an excellent question, but I think that given that we've got a lot more means to get the communication out quicker, I mean, things were going out. Jennifer Schuessler was the article, I believe, the author of the New York Times article. New York Times, I mean, it's got a big readership.
That's
and
a big
you
deal.
Can get the New York Times on the internet. You can get it on Twitter and Facebook. And of course, all of those means were being used. The difference is this: in 1883, the New York Times covered it then as well, but so did all of these other European, American newspapers. People were literally waiting for the newsboy to throw the paper into their yard, and they would run out. And by the way, I found articles in Australian papers from the 1800s.
Oh, truly?
This literally was around the world. And so, you know, I think in some ways it might have reached more in 2021, but it's hard to say. And I'm sure it did, but I can say this: the only reason it did is because we have more means of disseminating news in a much more broad way, in a quicker way. So,
well, I tell you, perhaps it didn't draw the attention of the British Prime Minister in 2021, but maybe it did. But this is the kind of fame that the scroll drew in the day. And so now this chapter deals with a number of weeks where Christian David Ginsburg is analyzing in fine detail, painstakingly analyzing, taking his good time. Everyone is waiting to see what he's going to say about it. And after a week, I think he begins to release information to the press. It makes the news in, as you were saying, like in papers like the Times, the Jewish Chronicles, the Athenaeum. But before it peaks, the fame and front page news of the scroll begins to peak, Shapira is feeling very confident about himself. He's set himself up in a really nice hotel, and he's quite pleased with the way that things are progressing. Let us know what is happening in this week before Ginsburg first releases any information to the press.
Yeah, before the newspapers hear about it, and it doesn't take long, like you said, but we get an account, and I really like the account given by his daughter Miriam Harry in Little Daughter of Jerusalem. She remembers as a young teenager the letters that were coming home, and here is a quote. It's in the book, but this is a quote from Miriam Harry. She said directly, he set foot in one of the best hotels. He was besieged by interviewers, reporters, and photographers. He was the hero of the hour. Ladies showered him with letters. His portrait appeared in every paper. Accounts of his life in Palestine, his travels, his researches were published everywhere. paragraphs dilating on his wonderful erudition found their way into current periodicals. His shop in Jerusalem was represented as a palace. So she presents now. Look, we know that she's idealizing her father, and she loves her father. And so, how accurate is this report from a little girl's perspective? She's simply saying that the whole world was focused on Shapira and his Moabite scroll, as some would call it. But
And
yeah, it is a big, big deal. I wish we could find. She mentions photographs. We only have one photograph of Shapira that we know of that survived, and we have one sketch that we'll talk about later. But yeah, this is it. This is it, man. It's at the height.
So the title of chapter 7 is The Hero of the Hour, and that clearly comes from that quote, which is great. I love that. And just to remind everybody, if they haven't got a copy of this already, but the Moses Scroll, and again, it is our textbook. It's available in paperback, hardcover, Kindle. You can get it straight away. And now in audio version, we're in chapter 7, The Hero of the Hour. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, he's writing letters home, and while we don't have the actual letters that he's writing back to Rosette, his wife, and Miriam, his daughter. We'll talk about his other daughter in just a minute, but Rosette and Miriam are in Jerusalem. Now, he's very, very confident, Jonah. He's just come out of Germany, and even though the Berlin meeting didn't go as well as he hoped, he has Goethe, he has Meyer, and he has Ehrman, who have all expressed their confidence in the authenticity. He knows that Goethe is working on a publication. And Jonah, when he left Berlin, as the last he knew, this authenticity was going to be published. So now here he is. He's in England. He's on that high, and he saw their faces in that room at the PEF headquarters. When he put on what we called his grand performance, he sees it in their face. And remember, the last guy out of the room, he hears him say, what does he say? This is one thing that can't be a fake or a forgery. So now the offer, I mentioned last week that even though at the time of the writing of my book, I was fairly convinced that it was a confirmed deal that he was asking £1 million for this scroll. Again, Matthew Hamilton challenges that was a direct give me £1 million, but somehow it comes up early in the stories. The word gets out that he is asking £1 million for it, whether he made that direct claim or not, which we don't think he did now. Nonetheless, that's the word on the street. So he is at least telling his family back in Jerusalem, we're going to be rich. In fact, here's a quote. This is a quote that comes from Miriam Harry, very short. There's no more need. There will be no more need, says Shapira, to spend long days in the stuffy shop, engraving text on olive wood covers for prayer books and albums. Good heavens, no. He would sell off the whole stock or perhaps make it a free gift to his shopkeeper. So he's already making plans to off with the business. I mean, he's going to be so rich, Jonah. The family is going to be, you remember the song in Fiddler on the Roof? If I were a rich man.
Yeah, I love it.
So the whole family is basically singing this.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about this musical just today, just to let you know, and I'm thinking, boy, it's been a while and I'd love to see it again, but yeah, continue.
Yeah, so the family is really expecting that this is going to go through. Now, Rosette seems to be, from all accounts, very conservative. She's not flashy. She's not the big spender, but boy, Miriam is loving this new life.
Right.
And one of the things, her kind heart, she wants to give to the poor and the beggars. So they're doing some of that. They're giving away money. People are coming to them from the old city and saying, "Oh, look, little Miriam, you would look so lovely in this nice new hat or these jewels. Look at this." So the family is being showered with these gifts. And look, the other shopkeepers and so forth, people in Jerusalem are saying, don't worry about look, we know that this manuscript is going to sell. We'll settle up later when Daddy comes home.
Hey,
And this is going on day by day by day.
so they're starting to count their eggs before they're hatched. They're so confident, which is something that happens. So listen, tell me, I have a question. So just remind me, was David Ginsburg at the meeting at the Palestine Exploration Fund when he showed it to everybody?
What's the question? When he what?
Was Ginsburg at that meeting, the initial
Yes.
display? He was there. Okay, and then the second question is, why is Ginsburg the man? Just give us a little bit of background about Ginsburg. Why is he the man to analyze the scroll and to report back on it and be in charge of the information flow?
Yeah, Christian David Ginsburg to this day is known for his skill in ancient Hebrew manuscripts. His magnum opus is a book called the Masoretico-Critical Edition of the Hebrew Bible, and it is this huge work. Now, he published other works associated with the Masoretic text. One of his goals in Masoretic studies was to get back at the best authoritative copy, to produce the most authoritative copy of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, bringing in all of these Masoretic notes and so forth. So he's so well known in this field, and he's so well respected that he's just received at this time in our story a 500-pound grant from his friend, who happens to be the Prime Minister Gladstone. Right. So he's got money. They pay him. He is known for his skill in Hebrew studies. By the way, 500 pounds in 1883 is equivalent, according to what I found when I was researching for the book in 2021 numbers, about $60,000. So he's received a massive grant from the Prime Minister for his studies. And but he's the man. To this day, I mean, I have several of his books in my library, some of which I had before I ever even started studying anything about Shapira. So he's the guy. If you're going to put somebody in charge of this manuscript, he's the guy.
And that charge is not contested by anybody. Everyone agrees that he's the best man for it. Okay. All right.
That's
and
right.
So he's into it.
And by the way, remember, it's not just that, but he was also involved in the Moabite stone. He wrote a book on the Moabite stone soon after it was published. He butted heads with Clermont-Ganneau on quite a few things. He also was involved in the Siloam inscription. He's one of the top scholars, not only of the time, but even to this day. So, yeah, he's the man. All right. He is the man.
Okay. So in a way, we have two men of the hour. And so it is under his analysis, and it remains so for a week, and everybody is waiting. Does anyone become impatient? Does Shapira become impatient?
Yeah, that's actually what is going on. Word starts to slip out that Shapira has brought with him to London a manuscript which is purportedly the oldest biblical manuscript. So word is beginning to slip out. Now, how much of that is Shapira, out on the street corner? I don't know. We just know that word begins to slip out, and so as the word begins to slip out, people are waiting and waiting and waiting. Now, it's only been a week, but they're expecting to hear something from Ginsburg very soon. Now, it seems from all the things that I read that Shapira, he certainly wants to be at Ginsburg's side. I mean, they know one another, but Ginsburg wants a little bit of privacy. We found a couple of the letters from Shapira to Ginsburg where he actually makes the comment, "Hey, I went to the bridge where we were supposed to meet, and you didn't show up. I can only hope, dear doctor," this is Shapira, "that everything's okay. I don't know why you didn't show up." And so what I began to notice is there seemed to be Shapira could come in, but he had to arrange these meetings with Ginsburg. Ginsburg is left alone for the most part in the British Museum, and he's working on his transcription. And so what we're going to find is that he begins to publish it very soon. But one thing that I wanted to say before we release the news about the first newscast that comes out on it, or the first newspaper report, one thing that Miriam Harry reports is that beyond the money, a lot of people say, oh, he had every reason to forge it because he wanted to make a lot of money. And there's a lot of focus on the monetary side of this. But Miriam Harry says something that I really think is true here. And it's in the book, and it says that what weighed far more with him than any pecuniary consideration was the fact that his reputation would now be established beyond any doubt, and that at last he would leap to fame. His vast knowledge as a Hebraist, which he acquired at the cost of 20 years of unremitting labor, and research throughout Palestine, would be blazoned abroad and would amaze the world. You see, so I think that's one of the main things, is that Shapira is hopeful of a very acceptance at the big table, if you will.
A recognition and validation of his skills. And
that's right.
Yeah, and I can understand it. Okay, so this is where we're at. So Ginsburg does finally, what is the first paper that he speaks to, Ross?
The first thing that comes out, we get on Friday, the 3rd of August, an article appeared in two papers, in the Times and in the Jewish Chronicle. Both of these papers publish a report. And one thing that I found in the 19th century, we get sort of on the wire. You get one paper will pick it up, and then you'll see it publishes in the Times, and then in the Jewish Chronicle. It's just these stories are syndicated or whatever. They get picked up and spread around. You see them popping up all over the world. A reporter at the British Museum says that, and it's just over and over and over. But the first date, August the 3rd, on Friday, this notice appears out, and the article is entitled "A New Version of Deuteronomy." A new version of Deuteronomy. Now, this article is in the book. Should we read some of that or all of it? What do you think? It's not too long. You want to just talk through it?
Do you want to read? I can read this if you like. So,
yeah, go ahead.
A new version of Deuteronomy in the Jewish Chronicle stated, a very curious Phoenician copy of Deuteronomy, or at least a part of that book, has been brought to London. A number of Semitic savants met the other day in the office of the Palestine Exploration Fund, where the document was to be seen. The word document ought not perhaps be used, for it consists of a number of small pieces of parchment in a very decayed and dirty condition. On some of them, the Phoenician letters are distinctly visible, while on others, spirits of wine must be passed with a camel hair pencil before the letters can be seen. The writing has to be, to a certain extent, deciphered and is part of the book of Deuteronomy. It is said to be as old as the Moabite stone, which is generally supposed to date back to about 900 before the Christian era.
Okay, before you go on, let's just touch this for just a second. So somebody on the inside is feeding this information out. We don't know where their source is. We don't know who they're talking to. But this reporter is getting some good information.
Also, this is not a direct quote from Ginsburg. This is information that has been leaked to a reporter. Maybe Ginsburg, maybe someone else, but it's not. Okay.
It could be Ginsburg. It could be someone else. But what happens is this comes out, and notice, if you're reading this, if you're one of the readers of the Times or the Jewish Chronicle, or later the New York Times, these articles come out in, you're reading that this could be, it's said to be as old as the Moabite stone. This is 900 BC. So people are getting excited and they're waiting on pins and needles. Go ahead.
It needs scarcely be stated that if this turns out to be correct, these pieces of leather will possess a high value, not only in money, but also in literary sense, for they contain some curious variations in the reading, among which we have an extra commandment. Interesting, we'll come back to that, which is, quote,
Yep.
"Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart." By joining the first and second commandment into one, this becomes the 10th in the Phoenician version. In chapter 7, verse 20, instead of hornet, the copy gives us leprosy. We'll talk about that in a minute. There are also important variations in chapter 28 in relation to the blessings, and the death of Moses is omitted. Wow, there's 4 things there, Ross. We've got to pause and quickly touch on that.
Yeah, no.
So an extra commandment, is there 11 commandments? We've spoken about this a number of times. Go ahead.
You know, if you look at this, where it says we have an extra commandment, but then when you read the next sentence, they should have been able to keep it straight, because it says by joining the first and second into one, this becomes the 10th in the Phoenician version. So even though but what happens is reporters get confused. People get confused easily. They say, wait, we have an extra commandment. Well, if there's an extra
Then there
of
must
the
be 11.
10, now we have an 11.
Mm.
Even though the very next line says that this is the 10th in the Phoenician version by combining the first and second. So I think that, and we've done discussions on this at length, and we'll come back to some of these elements, but this is one of the big ones. It's one of the first things that comes out is that, hey, this is word on the street. This Moabite version has 11 commandments, and it includes you can't hate your brother in your heart, which soon some even misquote this, even today, and they say that it has a commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It's not what it has. That's what they say it has, right?
So, and just for people who have just tuned in, of course, that particular commandment is in the Leviticus chapter 19 version of the attempt to recollect the 10. We find that there in verse 17, I think. Another thing that is mentioned here, hornets, leprosy. What's this about, Ross?
Yeah. Very, very, very close in the Hebrew. The spelling is only different in its final letter. And but I've looked at the drawings, and anyone who has looked at the drawings will see that they're reading this correctly, that instead of in chapter 7, verse 20 of Deuteronomy, where it says that there will be a hornet that chases, it is the word sarat, which is, again, just one letter different. Instead of a hey, it's a tav. And whenever you read this, you have to wonder, is it well, first of all, the word doesn't mean technically leprosy in Hebrew. It's some kind of
sort of infliction
ailment.
Yeah.
Right. Some kind of affliction. So I guess the question becomes, does it make sense that God is going to chase the enemy with a hornet, singular, like a big hornet? I mean, like hornet? Turn a big hornet loose on them.
So listen, I have a question about that. So obviously, as it states, we're dealing with a document in the Phoenician script. Is there a similarity, because I'm not that familiar with the Phoenician, in the Paleo-Hebrew, in the hey and the tav? Because obviously in the modern script, the script that we use today, there's an enormous similarity. Is there in the Paleo? There's not, which would suggest that this is potentially a misreading by a scribe when they were familiar with the Babylonian script, with the Syrian script, whatever we're dealing with here.
Yeah, the Assyrian script, yeah. Well, so, that becomes a question. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to go back and look at my notes. I'm going to write this down since you brought it up. This would only be a problem if the document is a forgery. In other words, you can't make the mistake if you're looking at something which is originally in Paleo. So a hey looks nothing like a tav in Paleo. But If someone is looking at a model that is in the later Hebrew script and making a copy, and they misread the hey and put a tav, okay, then that could be. So, but this is one of the allegations that comes out later. But I think that it even makes more sense to me that what is going to chase the enemy is this skin problem, this ailment, and not a hornet. Right? It just makes more sense to me.
Yeah,
But
I agree. So the next thing is that there's an important variation, Ross, in chapter 28 in relation to the blessings. I'm not sure that a variation is the way that I would put it. I mean, I guess it is a variation, but that is, of course, that in our canonical text, the blessings are not there at all. The blessed bees are not there at all, but they are found in the Moses scroll. That's a pretty significant variation, I would suggest.
It is very significant. And I guess, like you said, you could call it a variation. One doesn't have it when it's expected, and the other is expected and it does have it. So
Right.
that's a variation. That's a big one.
And yet the next one does state that the death of Moses is omitted. It should say that the blessings are included, the death of Moses is omitted. That's the differences. And that's significant. Why is that significant, Ross, that the death of Moses is omitted?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most significant points in this document is that the traditional view that Moses wrote the 5 books, and the 5 books include things that clearly Moses or anyone in his time could not have written. This is the biggest. Moses would not write about his own death. Now, in rabbinic literature, because you've already made the claim that Moses wrote the 5 books, some even claim that he wrote of his own death through tears. So, but that's just extreme trying to make the point.
Yeah, sure. All right, continuing on. The singular relic of I love the language. The singular relic of the past has been brought to this country by Mr. Shapira of Jerusalem, who was introduced to the meeting by Mr. Besant, and he explained how he became possessed of it. 5 years ago, he received information that some Arabs near Deban in Moab, the same locality where the Moabite stone was discovered, had a rare talisman to which they attributed all the good luck which befell them. Mr. Shapira, thinking it might be something ancient, employed some Arabs to aid him, and he described that character as, quote, people who would steal their own mother-in-law for a few, what's this?
Piastres.
Piastres.
It's a small coin, yeah.
End quote. By this means the talisman was carried off, and from a cave in the Wadi Mujib, it now appears in the Strand, subject to the anxious scrutiny of men learned in Hebrew and Assyrian writing. Ross.
Yeah. I tell you, this is well put. He does give the story. In fact, we have, I published on my academia page an account, 3 versions of the account. And then I received an email from Matthew Hamilton, who had his notes, and I'm now revising that because he reminded me, and I had these in my notes, but we have nearly 5 complete accounts of how he came to possess the manuscript strips. And it helps to put those side by side. I call that horizontal reading. Some people refer to it like a harmony of the accounts. But anyway, we're going to put those out as soon as that's done. But, he's dealing with some shady characters. And the writer of this article wants us to know is Shapira admitted it. Shapira said, listen, the people that I got to go get this thing would sell their own mother-in-law for a few coins. There's nothing holding them back from doing this.
It continues and says the previous reputation of Moabite pottery, which had the name of Mr. Shapira connected with it, naturally tends to make people careful in their judgment on Moabite manuscripts. After the Moabite stone was accepted as authentic, other Moabite stones were there. Other Moabite stones were found which had to be rejected, and savants are now inclined to be skeptical of anything coming from the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Before this copy of Deuteronomy can be passed as genuine, it will have to undergo a very minute scrutiny and be subject to a careful examination. It is now
Yeah.
under this process, and Dr. Ginsburg's report, as well as that of others who are engaged on it, will be looked for with great anxiety by all biblical scholars. Mr. Shapira talks of £1 million sterling, does he, as the value of this discovery. Purchases at the sum will probably be scarce, yeah, no doubt. Listen, just elaborate on that, Ross. Other Moabite stones? What is this?
You know, after, remember, it was August of 1868 that Frederick Klein was shown the Moabite stone. And very soon after that, other Moabite stones, some, now I'm talking about even before the destruction of the first one, there were others that began to show up. Now, after the destruction especially. And it just so happens that some of those made their way to and through Shapira's shop. So, you know, again, people began to say, wait a minute. And then you have the Moabite. Notice that it talks about this Moabitica affair. This is what Gutta says when he wrote in his preface. He said, you know, if this thing just had not come from
Moab,
Transjordan, it'd be a whole lot more believable. But then he said, but wait a minute, the fact that it does, and the fact that Shapira admits it, lends to the authenticity. In other words, you would not say on the heels of the Moabitica affair that, hey, guess what, fellas, this came from the land of Moab too. I mean, this is something that really hits me. If you found, can you imagine Shapira? I want to think Shapira's an honest broker. And I think he goes to tell the story and he says, guys, you're not going to believe this. I know what you're going to say, but east of the Jordan, and everybody's like, oh no, Shapira. He said, listen. East of the Jordan, in a cave, they found this document. I'm telling you, you know, and Bedouin are involved again. Bedouin were involved with the Moabitica. So this is really a shock, and it's called. Shapira refers to the sad business of the Moabitica, because what he's going to do is August the 6th. Now, remember, this report comes out in the Times and in the Jewish Chronicle on August the 3rd. August the 6th, he's going to sit down in the Cannon Street Hotel, very nice hotel, and write a letter to Dr. Ginsburg and say, listen, I have to straighten this out. I've got to get to the bottom. I want you to understand what really happened with the Moabitica. But that's on the 6th. So the 3rd, these articles come out in these respective papers. And I know I'm going to open this up, let you throw some questions in, but on the 4th, the British Museum brings in an expert by the name of Dr. Flight. Dr. Flight is asked to do a scientific examination on the scroll to see what he finds. And so he's got to look at, and among other things, he uses a microscope, and he's really trying. Now, what is he looking for? This is before our advanced scientific age, but he's looking for anything that might give it away as a forgery. And he wants to see, what is this black sticky stuff on the back of the scroll. So newspaper article comes out the 3rd. On the 4th, it's being tested.
Just remind
questions,
me,
comments.
Yeah, now that you've said that, that takes me back to Leipzig, and they did subject it to such testing by a chap by the name of, do you recall?
I don't recall right off the top of my head the name of the doctor, but I will find it.
Hoffman, Dr. Franz Hoffman.
Yep, that's right.
They sent word to Hoffman requesting his attendance the following day at the Hotel Hof for an urgent matter. And upon his, now let me just see what he was looking at. So they were testing it to make sure that they weren't going to damage it. What was it made of? What is the ink made of? We don't want to rub the ink off. And he does an examination and says that he found nothing suspicious.
That's right.
About the scroll. Dr. Flight, what was his conclusion then?
You know, the thing about Dr. Flight, and I have the article or his assessment in there.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what he says. As regard the strips of skin brought home by Shapira and alleged to be a very early manuscript of Deuteronomy, I have not much to say. The black coloring matter taken from the back and from the front of the skins does not appear to be asphaltum, but rather wax, like a beeswax of a very impure, dirty kind. Now
Okay.
he's trying to figure out what this is. By the way, this is one of the great questions that we find in Dead Sea Scroll discussions in the 1940s and 46, in the winter of 46, 47, when the first manuscripts of the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. You know what they said? They were black lumps, some of these scrolls, because they had this black sticky substance and it smelled of asphalt. Notice the word asphalt here. So everyone thought that this was some kind of asphaltum. It was in some way they thought of mummification, mummies. In 1946 and 47, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered and everyone was talking about them then, they said, you know, it reminds us of mummies. You know, there's this, it's almost like mummy strips is what they thought.
Well, they're preserving leather after all, aren't they? So they have, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Ross, because we do have the Dead Sea Scrolls. We do have examples of this black asphalt type substance on the back. Surely they've done a forensic analysis of that material. What is the conclusion there?
It is on my list to weigh every bit of this evidence, but because I'm currently working on an article for the Dead Sea Scroll Encyclopedia on the Shapira fragments. But here's what I'm looking at. One of the things that is suggested, and it's gaining ground. So I don't know. I want to read the test and see what the results of the test. But some propose that this black substance is actually the decomposition of the animal skin. It's excuse the crudeness, but it's like oozing. It's really, you know, it's this black gelatinous like substance that is coming from the scroll. But at the time, what most people thought, and I've not ruled this out yet, is that on the back of this scroll, there was a black substance that was smeared on it. The thought was that maybe it was some kind of like a tar, asphalt, bitumen, and then it was then to preserve it, to keep it subtle and soft. And then on top of that, they found traces of pieces of linen that were stuck in the what they thought was asphalt. By the way, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have examples of the same exact phenomena that you have linen pieces that are stuck in this black tarry substance. So Flight, what he's saying is, he said, listen, I subjected it to a number of tests. He said, I don't think it's asphalt, but it's some kind of dirty wax. Now, in my mind, I'm wondering if it is, in fact, decomposition, could that give off the appearance and presence and reaction of the same as a wax? You know, maybe but he says, notice, it leaves an ash amounting to 10 to 15%, readily melts, and when destroyed by further heating, does not emit the smell of asphalt. So he puts it through a pretty good test, and ultimately what he says is, you can do this, you can look at it. He said, be careful. If we determine that there's a high probability that these are authentic, because he's not able to make that decision, that's out of his field. But he said, if you really want to do that, he said, I believe if the surface should be cleaned and all the character laid bare, that chloroform would be the best agent to employ, and that all the writing could thus be exposed clearly. Believe me, he says, yours truly, Walter Flight.
All right. Yeah, it just makes me wonder if I guess it's either got to be natural fats from the skin, or a wax type substance for the sake of preservation of the leather. Well, time will tell, I suppose. Um, what next? What is the next news release?
All right. So now we've got the test done. The first report comes out, and Shapira is beginning to release the text of the scroll. So what he does is, the first thing out of the gate, rather than take it in order, he begins, Jono, with releasing the 10 Commandments. That is, he knows that he's going to hook the
Ginsburg
readers.
does?
Now, what's that?
Ginsburg releases it, or Shapira?
Yeah, Ginsburg. Yeah. Ginsburg is in the museum. He publishes in the Athenaeum on August the 11th in an article called the Shapira Manuscript of Deuteronomy. Here's what he says. This is the 11th of August. Without at present passing an opinion on the genuineness or otherwise of the fragments of Deuteronomy now under examination by me in the British Museum, I herewith give the text of the Decalogue and an improved version of the translation which appeared in the Times of August 3rd. So we know that in the August 3rd Times edition, it included a translation of the 10 words. In the Athenaeum, he publishes not only the Hebrew text, or not only the translation, but the Hebrew text as well. And he says, he goes on to say in the next issue of the Athenaeum, I hope to give the other portions of the text in their proper sequence, commencing with the beginning of Deuteronomy. So he's picking up, we know this, Jono, he's beginning with fragment E, right? And because he knows that's going to hook the audience.
Right.
His readership around the world is going to say, this is what I really want. I really want to know what are the 10 Commandments in this new scroll.
Yeah. And
so
it's the easiest part to read, right, Russ? Is that right?
What?
It's the easiest part to read as well, of the scroll?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We, from our records, both Ginsburg as well as Goethe tell us that this fragment is among the best and best preserved in terms of the text. So now he publishes the Hebrew text, followed by an English translation, and then he just puts a few comments, and I'd like to go through those. So he says, every commandment, point number one, every commandment begins a fresh line and finishes with the refrain, I am God, your God. All right. Number two, in the Decalogue portion, the words are not only divided, but there is a point after every word, as in the Moabite stone. Now, his readers know this stuff. See, this is the Athenaeum it's got I think, a pretty scholarly academic audience here. They're well read back in the day. 3, there's not only a stop after the particles et and lo, but these two expressions are closely connected with the respective words to which they belong to form one expression. So in the commandment lo tignov, he just told them that after every word there is a dot, a word separating dot. But now he says, but in the case of the particle et and lo, there's no separating dot. So it would say lo tignov. It'd say word separating dot, lo tignov, word separating dot. Now that's interesting, and he'll come back to that in another edition. He goes on to say that and I'm going to just kind of paraphrase these, in one of the Decalogue slips, you've got 2 manuscript copies, basically identical, they say. One has the 10 Commandments with this. You remember in the commandment to honor your father and your mother,
that it may go well with
the
you.
phrase, therefore your days will be lengthened.
Yeah.
One of the 2 manuscripts had that phrase. According to Ginsburg, the other one did not.
Mm-hmm.
So now, interesting. We'll have to come back. And then he goes into, let's see, not only do the slips examine 2, if not 3 duplicate or triplicate texts, but 2 distinct handwritings of apparently the same archaic letters. He begins to think that there are 2 scribes responsible for producing 2 different versions of the same text. And then he gets into some of the peculiarities that stand opposing to the Masoretic text. One is that we're used to seeing the verb, he brought them out of the land of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But in this manuscript, it says that he liberated them. So he said, I don't know. He says it's not a word that occurs in the Hebrew scriptures, though derivatives of it occur in 1 Kings, Isaiah, etc. He says it does occur in the Targum. And so he's trying to figure out, why would this word find itself in a document that's ancient?
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, I'm almost done with this list. He says, point number 8, neither does the phrase Elohim Eloheka, God thy God, occur in the Old Testament. Now, he's going to have to eat those words. Someone is going to challenge him on that, and then he corrects himself in the next edition. But here's what he wraps up his part in this newspaper this day on the 11th. He said, and by the way, I wish that scholars today would go by this. He says, may I suggest that those scholars who may wish to take part in the discussion on the nature and character of these fragments should first inspect them before they commit themselves to any strong opinion. An examination of the slips themselves is alike due to fair criticism and to Mr. Shapira. Now, we can't examine the strips, but how many scholars today do we know, Jono, who have not really even studied the text and all the story, and yet they quickly come to a conclusion? He says you shouldn't do that. The final thing that appears in August 11th newspaper is an account that Shapira wrote Ginsburg on August the 7th, how he came to possess the manuscript. And so that makes its way into the newspaper here.
That hits the press as well. Very good. Okay, so we have 2 major press releases, one on the 3rd and one on the 11th is what he's saying. So people are really waiting. And clearly there's an enormous amount of questions from Ginsburg fans, no doubt. And they're still waiting on his verdict as to whether it's an authentic scroll or not. That finds us obviously in chapter 8, which we will be getting to next week, Ross.
That's right. One thing that it's sort of like Ginsburg is masterful at stringing along the audience. In the book, in this chapter, I quoted a passage. Ginsburg was quoted in the Athenaeum saying, the writing of the Shapira manuscripts seems not to be a picked alphabet, but current, and this is in favor of the genuineness of the document. It's pretty clear, the article goes on to say, that whatever the age of the leather, the writing must either date from somewhere about 800 BC or from AD 1880. Now, that's clever. What Shapira's saying is, I don't know how old the leather is, but the writing is either going to prove to be 800 BC or 1880 AD. So what he's saying is, ladies and gentlemen, tune in next week in the Athenaeum's section, and I'll tell you more. So he's building up this case that the world is waiting to hear, and they're like, "Is the new? Oh, here comes the paper boy." You know, they're excited to see the next paper. He's built this. If it had been in a time of Twitter and Facebook, he would have, and YouTube, he would have millions of views. This thing is, and by the way, we should have millions of views. We're telling the story of perhaps the greatest manuscript discovery of all times. I
Quite
mean,
right.
what in the world are people doing? What else would they be watching?
Right. So we're going to continue next week in chapter 8. On Display Before the World is the title of this chapter. Once again, the book, The Moses Scroll. You can get it on Amazon. And before we go, the conference, is it full?
Oh, man, I'm telling you, it is so close to being full. I think I can have maybe 2 or 3 more. But what needs to happen is if people are watching this, what I've done, and they have to be patient with me, what I've done is this. I put on the website, uiwu.org, uiwu.com, under conference registration, people can go there, but there's a note that says we're capping it at 60. We want it to be, you know, our venue is only so big, and we want it to be comfortable for people. We're providing food. There's no charge. I mean, this, Jonah, I don't even know what else to say.
Just let us know that you're coming.
Man.
We want you to be there. We'd love to see some viewers of this program. By all means, turn up in Louisiana, St. Francisville at the 81st UI conference. Go ahead.
They can't just turn up. So here's what has to happen at this point. If they register, then they have to wait for me to write them back and say yes or no.
We're at that point.
Because I have to. We're that close. Honestly, we're that close.
Okay.
So they can go ahead and register, but don't you drive down here with a busload of 12 kids until we verify that we have room for you.
You may end up in the car park in the overflow department. But if you can't make the conference, then surely you can make the Tanakh tour. And we are aiming for late February, early March. You can go to tanakhtours.com, T-A-N-A-K-H, tanakhtours.com for those details. Now we are going to go over to the Yachad for a little bit of Q&A, and you can join that, dear viewers, by clicking join under this video. And that's what we're doing. We will see you this time next week.